That's the way it goes, son.
So it looks like I'm going to make it. I don't want to shop, but I just want to get those. Oh, mental shop? I don't think they want to mentally shop. My wife does. It's like herding cats. Yeah, because I can plug in here.
Yeah, we're not up.
Oh, we're not
They got
up
to
yet.
start their meeting and everything first.
I presume you're going to introduce me?
I will.
Okay, good.
Over here.
Good evening. We're going to call the regular meeting of the City Council for Tuesday, November 22nd, 2011 to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have a roll call. Patrick Green. Here. Scott Stevens. Present. Keith Sadowski. Here. Robert Bacamino. Here. Kelly Collegio.
Here.
Stephen Warner. Here. Cecil St. Pierre. Here. Mr. Secretary, item number 4, adoption of the consent agenda.
Item 4, adoption of the consent agenda.
So move. Support.
Motion by Green, support by Warner. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. The consent agenda has been adopted. Item number 5.
Item 5, adoption of the agenda. Motion to approve with discussion.
Support.
Motion by Stevens, support by Green. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to point out that two things. That there, if you notice, there's no meetings, minutes on this agenda here. And that's because of the back-to-back meetings that we had. We received the special meeting of November 14th and the meeting of November 15th on Monday, which was in the required amount of time, but not enough time to get it on the agenda. And so those items, the minutes are available for viewing, but obviously they're not approved yet. And to go along with that, real quick, December, we also have December 20th and December 13th. Those two meetings will also be back-to-back, so that same instance will be happening with the minutes again. Thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, what did he just say? Oh, yes, Mr. Sadowski.
Yeah, just to, I guess, repeat a little bit what Mr. Stevens had said. Yeah, that we do that, that often comes into conflict when we do have those meetings close together, so that's par for the course, so, thank you.
Mr. Stevens, or Mr. Chair,
Mr. Green.
Stevens, did you have an item to add?
Yes, I'm sorry. I have an item myself, thank you for reminding me, to add to the agenda under, would be item 12C under council business. Correct, 12B.
Is that an amendment to your motion, Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Agree. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The agenda has been adopted. Item number 6, Mr. Secretary.
Item 6, approval of the bills.
Motion to approve?
Motion by Sadowski.
Support.
Support by Green. Any discussion?
Mr. President?
Ms. Collegio.
Yeah, could I just ask Mr. Milzak one question real quick? I'll make him come all the way from the back. Get your exercise. Thank you, sir. I appreciate...
Good evening, Council.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you answering a couple questions I had earlier today. I know when I talked to you about page number 12, Macomb County MSU Housing Education, $2,500. You weren't really sure, and I think you were trying to lead me in the right direction. I just want to make sure that if you'll get back with me on that, just so I have a full knowledge of what that is, what type of housing education, and
Absolutely.
why we'd be, I appreciate it.
I'll get with Gina Hensley. She's gone this week, and I'll get with her on Monday.
Excellent, after the holiday. And one other question, I know page 9, I had called you with a question regarding Zanaga Cement Company with the 2 bills and the same check number, and you kind of explained that to me, different accounts and that type of thing. If you could also just get back with me what accounts those come out of, I would appreciate it.
Oh, I can tell you right now, yeah.
Okay, yep.
For those 2, that's the local roads and also the major roads. So basically what that is we have one check that we cut for the work that they did, and they had work in both of those funds, both local and major.
Excellent, thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
once again, have a happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for the last minute,
Okay.
call I gave you. That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Anything further? I do have a question, Mr. Malzak. I'm looking at the Warren Water and Sewer System bills, and it's actually it's the first page. The data mail services for professional services and the utility billing postage, is that for the information that's provided in the along with the water bill, or is it the newsletter? What does that consist of?
Right. We use data mail to mail out the water bills, and so basically that's the postage for it and also the process of putting the bills together for us.
Now, and I have to apologize, I don't look at the water bill too much when it comes to my house, but has it been in the past that do they note when the increase takes place? Because there's actually 2 increases that will take place. There's the City of Warren increase, which the mayor talked about, which was 2.5, probably one of the lowest I can recall, and also the Detroit water rate increase. Are those noted each time it happens to a person's water bill?
Right. I can't speak to if it's always been that way, but I believe it is.
Because people have indicated, when I went door to door, that they were complaining there's a water bill. Just tell me what it is. Is it the our rate increase? It's Detroit rate increase? Just tell them, and I think that is a good idea. Mark it when you're gonna, so you can tell the people. So if we need anything from City Council in the form of a resolution, I think it's a good idea. We use the water mailing, the water bill mailings to give out a lot of other information. I think the part of the transparency,
Right.
let them know. That's
Council-
all they ask for.
Council President St. Pierre, I will take that back and make sure that we put any type of increase in that so the residents know.
Thank you, I think it's a good idea. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Anything else? In regards to this, take a roll call. Mr. Sadowski?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Bacamino?
Yes.
Ms. Colegio?
Yes.
Mr. Warner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. St. Pierre, yes. Announcements?
Item 7, announcements.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it next Saturday, a week from Saturday, December 3rd, is the City of Warren Christmas tree lighting. Begins at 6 p.m. with a parade. I hope everyone can make it out there. It's always a wonderful event. I don't know which band is playing this year. I think Cosno does every year, but we look forward to that. And along with everything else, wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other announcements?
Mr. President?
Ms. Colegio?
If I may, Liberty Foursquare Church on 11 Mile, every Monday, they are partnering with Forgotten Harvest, and they're giving away free bags of groceries. So if you know anyone in need this season, all they ask is that you call ahead of time to make sure that, they have enough and can process and, they don't have to turn anyone away. The number there would be 586-754-2400. Once again, that's 754-2400, and that's Liberty Foursquare Church every Monday. And happy Thanksgiving as well.
Mr. Chair, real quick again, if I could
Mr.
add
Green.
on. I was speaking with Councilwoman Colegio earlier. I came across someone today who needed that service, and you really need to communicate it out as well as you can to the public. I called the mayor's office, spoke with Ms. Lawson. She gave me all the information, and besides Liberty Foursquare, there's also Mount Calvary has a food pantry open till 1 o'clock, and then Hope Center near 14 Mile and Groesbeck also. So there's plenty of areas around. It's just communicating out to the people in need. So for anyone out there that's listening, if you come across it, there is information out there, and it is a very good cause. Thank you.
Any other announcements?
And,
Mr.
Mr.
Warner?
Chair, of course I have it, Mr. Chair, thank you.
I know.
As I stated last week at the meeting, the Warren Goodfellows Food Distribution Center is in crisis. This weekend, obviously Thanksgiving kicks off the Christmas season. Please do what you can. There's a number of schools in the area that are doing can drives through the students, but if you would like to make a donation, you can contact Daryl Nyaport at area code 586-651-5716, and also we will shortly be selling newspapers for the No Kitty Without a Christmas Fund. We'll be selling newspapers at various locations, but we're also looking for volunteers to help sell on neighborhood corners and in the streets. So again, if you would contact Daryl Nyaport at 586-651-5716, and have a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stevens?
Thank you. I just wanted to remind the public once again that the December 27th meeting, regularly scheduled meeting of the City Council, has been moved by resolution to December 20th. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'd like to make an announcement. There's the passing of Judge Walter Jakubowski. Judge Jakubowski was a 37th District Court judge here in the City of Warren. I also, I have a special place in my heart with him. When I first was elected to City Council in 1987, we sat together. He was the city attorney for Mayor Bonkowski as well. I also knew him as a neighbor and as a friend. I think we should take this time and have a moment of silence for him, unless anybody else has any things to say, because I know some other people knew him very well. He's always made himself available and was very personable. And his wife, Nancy, I hope the best for you in these troubled times. And at this time, we'll have a moment of silence. With that, thank you very much, and we'll move on to item number 8, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 8A, presentation by the administration regarding results of 2011 Cobalt Citizen Satisfaction Survey.
The floor will recognize Mr. Hurley.
Good evening, members of council.
Mr. Hurley.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to make a presentation to this new body. A little bit of history. 3 years ago, when we started the City Stat program, Mayor Fouts made it very abundantly clear that he wanted to engage all stakeholders in their observations of the way our city works, and how we can improve them, how we can make changes to either enhance services or, in the case of budgetary constraints, which is where we find ourselves 3 years later, being able to make tough decisions that don't diminish the level of service that we have, and that also take into account all the different factors financially that we face. So in 2009, we engaged in the first phase of the Cobalt Community Research Citizen Satisfaction Survey. Lark Simoleon and I, with the Communications Department and City Stat, partnered to create the first phase. And the concept of benchmarking was very important because we needed to start with a baseline of where we stood with our community right off the bat. It hadn't occurred to anyone when the last time citizens had been engaged as to level of services. Dave Berger, who is also with us tonight and will be joining us in the next agenda item for a regional update, started us off with the idea with the SEMCOG curriculum that we should engage our citizens first and foremost. Mayor Fouts, being the neighborhood councilman and then, of course, priding himself as the neighborhood mayor, wished to also engage the citizens just so that we would understand a little bit better the level of services that as we entered the mayor's first term that we would know where we stood. And then 2 years later, we have now engaged in the second phase. It's the same, the survey is the same as the first, except that upon SEMCOG's recommendation and some of the changes that were made with Cobalt, that we would not just ask citizens what their level of satisfaction was, but we would also engage them in a priority assessment of, with diminishing tax revenues and the potential for some services to have to be altered in some way, how they would do it. Because they are the stakeholders, as are we, as are you, city council members, as is the mayor. You're all elected officials. As administrators and city workers, we're also stakeholders, but most importantly, the mayor feels that citizens are ultimately the stakeholders in this. So the second phase, and we'll show you a little bit more, not just on the levels of satisfaction, which is benchmarked with ourselves from 2 years ago. It's benchmarked nationally and with the region. So those results don't just show you levels of satisfaction, but as you'll see, they'll also show you areas where citizens have told us that they believe they would prioritize the way we handle things going forward. The purpose of this meeting, obviously, is to inform a brand new council, to inform our citizens as we embark on our next journey. This is not the budgetary process yet, so getting into the ins and outs of what we may or may not do is not necessarily appropriate. But the philosophy of knowing what tools are in our toolbox and how our citizens rate us is very important to us. And with that, I'll introduce William St. Amour, who is the Executive Director of Cobalt Community Research. William can tell you a little bit more about himself and Cobalt Community Research, but I will tell you that SEMCOG, our first phase of the survey, was augmented by a $2,000 grant from SEMCOG to engage in this survey. And we have, again, used the same company, using the same template, so our results will be benchmarked. And with that, I present to you William St. Amour, Cobalt Community Research. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you tonight to review the results of the study. Let me give you a little bit of background on Cobalt and who we are. Cobalt is a 501c3 nonprofit research coalition. We work with communities and school districts across the state and also across the country. We're based here in Lansing, Michigan, and we were really created to help local units of government adapt to the changing economy and the changing social landscape, the changing demographic landscape, so that we can turn the corner in the state, and as things do return to more prosperity, that we're able to take advantage of that. Why research matters? There's a number of important reasons to spend time doing this kind of exercise. First of all, understanding the community values and priorities help you plan and communicate more effectively about community decisions. It gives you that context that helps you connect with the residents more effectively. All surveys deal with perception. Some perceptions do reflect reality, some perceptions do not, but understanding perceptions helps you manage them, and that's key because it's the perceptions that drive behavior. And the behaviors that we use in this particular research model are people remaining in the community, recommending it to others, encouraging businesses to start up within the community, volunteering, and supporting city government. So those are the 5 behavioral outcomes that we use in this. Satisfaction is great. Satisfaction is something of a fluffy kind of measure, but thinking about those outcomes, those behavioral outcomes, and how you can maximize those outcomes is a key piece that this tool gives you. Community engagement certainly helps you have some support for some of the difficult decisions that you're looking at as you're thinking about services, which services to adapt into the future environment. Helps you balance the demands of vocal minorities with the broader community. Sometimes folks have very strong views that they share with you. Sometimes those views are absolutely right on. Sometimes they're not. Having a tool to know when they're consistent with public opinion and when they're not is a key thing to be able to do. And it is just a good bottom line, good government kind of practice to have. For this specific survey, we had several goals. First of all, we wanted to support budget and strategic planning decisions that you're looking at, not only in the coming year, but for the next several years, to make sure that Warren continues to service residents effectively. Want to explore service assumptions. So we set a baseline in 2009. We wanted to come back and take a look to see how you're comparing to that baseline now. We wanted to look to see which aspects of community, quality of life, have the most impact on those outcome behaviors that I talked about, remaining in the community, recommending to others, encouraging businesses to start up, and so on. Because not everything that you do within the community has the same kind of a weight in driving those outcomes. So knowing how much weight each of those have is really a key thing to keep in mind strategically as you're planning the community for the future. Helps you track improvements over time, and importantly, you can benchmark performance against a number of different indices at the state level, at the regional level, and at the national level. Because your scores naturally go up and down. Some of that movement is because of changes that you've made. Some of those changes are because of broader environmental things that you have no control over, the economy, broader political things, and so on. So having a benchmark that's done consistently allows you to see, are you moving in a different direction than the benchmark? Are you outperforming the benchmark? Are you falling behind the benchmark? Helps you tell the story of Warren with your eyes open and in a way that's statistically credible. Okay, let's get to the bottom line so you know how you did. First of all, you did very well from a performance standpoint when compared against Michigan regional and national benchmarks. If we look at overall satisfaction, and we'll do that in a minute, you'll see that your score statistically is really the same as 2009, but that's important because at the state, regional, and national level, satisfaction has dropped. So the fact that you were able to hold constant is actually a gain in terms of the comparative performance of Warren to other communities of similar size. There are several areas where improvement has a lot of leverage to it, where you can really move those outcome behaviors more significantly. And those 5 areas are economic health, transportation infrastructure, city government management, public schools, and taxes. Now, I list these not because they're good or bad, just that these are the things that have the most weight in terms of moving the scores, your overall satisfaction of those outcome behaviors. And we'll talk about how you perform in these different areas in just a minute. We also asked about general direction. Conceptually, where is the public in terms of dealing with budgetary shortfalls? And the things that resonated with the public most were consolidating services, privatizing and negotiating employee wage and benefit concessions, where the general budgetary approaches, those were the general budgetary approaches that had the most support. There was variation by individual service when you started looking at individual services within the city, but still as a general approach, consolidation, some of those kinds of things are things that do resonate with your residents. What I'm going to be presenting today is high-level information, so summary-level information. You have a lot of detail available, and the detail is really where you want to get when you start thinking about actions. From a demographic standpoint, you're able to see the results by individual cohorts, so by age, for younger residents, for older residents, for people who have moved here recently, for people who are employed or unemployed or work inside the city or work outside the city. So there's a number of ways that we cut up that information that you can dive into and that you'll want to spend some time with. You have several available tools. First of all, you do have the detailed questions and responses broken down by all of those different demographic groups. And we do something that we call thermal mapping. I won't share this with you at the moment. This will be emailed to you, but essentially you'll get this detailed chart that goes through and it shades things in red and blue, and it just draws your eyes to particular demographic groups that rated a particular question higher or lower than others. So you can see where your scores are particularly strong and where they lag a bit. We have a lot of detail in terms of your scores and how they perform with local governments in Michigan, the Midwest, and the nation, and that's both communities overall as well as communities of similar size. And then because we're tied in with the University of Michigan's American Customer Satisfaction Index, you're able to compare your scores with non-local government entities. So how do you compare it to school districts, to counties, to the state, and also to private sector, and federal government, and individual agencies and individual companies within there. Methodology. Methodology matters. This was a true random sample, 1,500 residents drawn from voter registration. We utilized a utility called random.org. It's a well-respected utility for doing this, widely used by universities. It's based in Trinity College in Dublin. The mailings themselves were conducted in May and June. What we did is an initial mailing out to 1,500 and then a second mailing out to those who hadn't responded. So we used a survey ID number so that we didn't have someone responding 12 times to the survey. We don't tie those survey IDs to the individual results, so we don't know how people responded, but we were able to track who did respond to make sure that we heard from folks. Valid response from 449 respondents. That's very strong. That gives you a traditional margin of error of plus or minus 4.6%. And for the core questions that we use in benchmarking, the analysis is a bit tighter, and you have a margin of error of plus or minus 1.8%. One of the questions that often come up is with a community as large as Warren, is 449 residents really enough to give you a sense of what the community overall thinks? And one of the things I like to point out is that for a national survey with a margin of error of plus or minus 5%, you only need to hear from 384 folks, if they're sampled correctly, to get a good sense of what 330 million people think. So the fact that we have 449 for a city of Warren size is actually very solid statistically. We looked at the results that came in. We compared those results to the overall voter files in terms of the distribution by school district and by ward and for skewing, and we saw that there was less than a 1.3% skew. So that's, again, very solid, reliable data. The next piece that you're looking at is the actual research model that we used. And essentially, it's an input-output kind of model. The outcome behaviors that I talked about are over on the right-hand side. People remaining in the community, recommending, volunteering, encouraging businesses to move in. And community image also is on there. So what do people think about Warren in terms of brand? Is this a safe community? Is this a good community for families, and so on? So those outcome behaviors are driven by satisfaction, and in this model, satisfaction is really the value that residents have in living with the city. What's that value proposition? How much value do you deliver to them? And that value is determined by the various experiences that citizens have had. And you can see the different areas that we assess in the survey, everything from schools to transportation infrastructure, fire and emergency, utilities, taxes, police, and on down the line. So this is really designed to be a holistic tool to give you a sense of community drivers overall. And then there's a separate section going into very specific services and programs provided by the city, so you can see what the priorities are there as well. Okay. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these individual bar charts, but I want to make sure that you know how to read them, so as you look at them, they make sense. First of all, on the legend, you'll see that these are 2011 and 2009 scores. So we're looking at changes in Warren compared to the national scores and compared to the Michigan scores. So you can see what the movement looks like. The older years, so 2009, are the lighter colors, 2011 are the darker colors. So Warren is the dark blue for 2011, 2009 is the lighter blue. And what you see generally is that a number of the ratings did decline for Warren, things like community image, recommended as a place to live, but they also declined in a number of the benchmarks as well. One of the things that you want to think about with any of these charts are where are the highs and where are the lows. And you can see that some of the high areas for Warren are people saying that they'll remain in the community, support the current administration, recommend as a place to live. Those are all good scores. Really the two areas that were the weakest in terms of highs and lows were planning to volunteer and encouraging businesses to start up. So, and those are both areas that have actually improved from 2009 to 2010, but they're still lower scores and they're areas to think about. Another set of bar charts that we do is giving you a much more detailed look of how well you compare in 2011 to benchmarks. And so what this is showing you, instead of comparing to 2009, this is comparing to those different benchmarks for similarly sized communities. So you can see yourself in the dark blue compared to the national overall in the darker green, compared with the national similarly sized communities in the light green. Orange is the Midwest. That light peachy orange is Midwest for similarly sized communities. The purple, dark purple, is for the, well, this is Midwest. Actually, I threw you off a little bit. The orange is Michigan. Midwest is the purple, and the light purple is for Midwest with similarly sized communities. And when we look at this too, this is looking at the overall, again, outcomes. So things like community satisfaction, you can see here that Warren is actually above the benchmarks. You can see community image, slightly below the benchmarks at the national and the Midwestern level, but you're well above the benchmarks for Michigan. Recommend as a place to live, again, you're above Michigan for similarly sized communities. Remain in the community, you're above Michigan. Plan to volunteer, a little bit below Michigan benchmarks. Encourage business startups, it's a low score, but it's still above the benchmarks. And support current administration, you can see that that's a very solid performance as well. Okay, one of the areas that I wanted to talk about on this one is community image. You can see that that dropped a little bit. There's a number of questions underneath community image, and this is just sharing with you the detail of what the movement has been from 2009 to 2011 at the Warren level, at the national level, and at the Michigan level. And what you can see is that community image has eroded a little bit in the last couple of years. Again, looking at the highs, things that are particularly strong for Warren, enjoyable place for seniors is a very strong score, and then coming in, things like a safe place to live, enjoyable place for children, looking at an enjoyable place for everyone else, those are all strong scores, generally a great place to live. Some of the areas that are a bit weaker, enjoyable for young adults is a weaker score. Safe place to walk at night is a weaker score. We don't have all the detail as far as the 2009 scores because we just started asking this question last year, but you can see how you compare to those different areas as well. Community image components compared to the benchmarks. So this is getting into similarly sized communities with those lighter colors. So you can see what your performance looks like again there. And the pattern is still pretty strong that while you may be below national or at national or Midwestern levels, generally you're still outperforming the Michigan large city benchmarks. So based on the particular environment in Michigan, you're still doing a pretty solid job. Again, that safe place to walk at night is your lowest area and something you might want to dig into a little bit more. quality of life components. So these are the experiences that people have in your community over the last year and how they rate those. And you can see generally going from 2009 to 2011, the light blue to the dark blue, in many areas the scores have actually, if not maintained, they've gone up a little bit. A couple of areas that have declined a smidge, but again, no major swings. One thing I do want to point out here is that as far as the experiences that people have in the city of Warren, generally they're above the benchmarks in most of these broad categories. So that speaks well of the city. Although one caveat that I want to point out is that being above the benchmarks is not always a good thing. If you're in a situation where you're looking at making service adjustments, moving resources around, if there's an area where you're significantly above your competition and that's not an area that's a priority for residents, well, just because you're above the benchmarks doesn't mean you shouldn't take a hard look at that and potentially consider changing some of that resource allocation into an area that has higher leverage for driving satisfaction, those outcome behaviors, or general spending priorities for the residents. So as we go through this, and as you dive into more detail with staff, really think about those services. Is the service a high priority? Is the service a driver? And then how are we compared to the benchmarks? Are we above or below? And what kind of resource choices might you want to make along those lines? Next slide, again, just looking at those experiences compared to those more detailed benchmarks for similarly sized communities. Again, you're above the benchmarks in most areas, especially when we're looking at Michigan communities of similar size, those peach-colored lines. Okay. This next chart is one of my favorites. Essentially what it does is it maps out all of these areas that you saw a couple of slides back, these different experiences that residents have. And we plot them out so that the performance is on the vertical. So the top bubbles are the things that you do relatively well. Bottom bubbles, those are the things that you don't do as well on a relative basis. Things on the right-hand side of that screen, those are areas that have a lot of leverage on satisfaction and those outcome behaviors. Things that are on the left-hand side, those are areas that have a weaker impact on satisfaction. So what you end up with are things in the upper right-hand quadrant, things like law enforcement, parks, library taxes. These are things that you're doing well, that are having a positive impact. They're exerting a positive pressure on citizen satisfaction and those outcome behaviors. Things that are on the bottom right, these are areas that are actually eroding your scores a bit. The economy has been one that for almost every community we've been working with, it's been in that same location. It stinks and it's driving things down. It's a major eroder. So as the economy does start to turn eventually, that's going to have a major effect on the community as well. But transportation infrastructure, public schools, those are three areas as well that have a significant amount of impact. Now, the upper left-hand quadrant, this is always an area that I like to talk about. Things that are over on the left-hand side, residents aren't saying that these things are not important. What this chart is telling you isn't what's important and not important. This is really telling you almost what are the differentiators for you as a community. So things like fire department, healthcare, telecom, various utility services, those are things that you do very well, but they don't really differentiate Warren from other communities. So as you think about those areas, those are kind of nuts and bolts. They're key things. These are things that are often important to residents, but they're not necessarily things that are going to drive the community to differentiate it to increase those various outcome behaviors. What I'm going to do next is go through just these five, the bubbles that are the most impactful, the five that are furthest over to the right, and just to show you some of the detailed questions underneath them to give you a sense of your performance. So economic health, again, the key area as far as the effect on your scores. So the set of bar charts that are farthest to the left, that's the overall scores, and as I go through some of these charts, everything over on that right-hand side tends to be overall. So you can see that you're certainly well above Michigan, those orange bars. You're a little bit above national, a little bit below Midwest. But as we start breaking economic health into its component questions, living costs, quality of jobs, affordability of housing, availability of jobs, stability of property values, strength of local economy, you get a more nuanced view of specifically what do people mean when they say economic health and how do you stack up in those different areas. Now, often you're still above the benchmark, certainly above the Michigan benchmarks, But you still want to almost block the benchmarks out of your mind and think about your high scores and your low scores. Just thinking about that blue bar, where are you particularly strong? Affordability of housing, living costs are both two strengths. Areas that you're particularly weak, stability of property value, availability of jobs. So those are some things to think about as you're planning. And even your best scores are still below 60. So even though you've got some tall bars there, this is an area that certainly needs continued focus. I had mentioned the thermal charts. This is just sort of a mini example of that in a way that you can read. Essentially, we have all of the demographics in the survey broken down. This is just showing you at a high level a thumbnail of some of those demographics. But basically, on a scale of 0 to 100, you can see how different demographic groups rate each of the questions. And we also have your 2009 overall results there, so you can see that as well. So scores that are deeper red are scores that are lower. Things that are lighter colored, going to the blue, are higher scores. So essentially, if you're looking at economic health and you're looking at residency, you can see that people who have been here 1 year or less rated living costs and affordability of housing as being particularly strong. People who are unemployed, if you go down a little bit further, people who are unemployed, particularly low scores for availability of jobs and stability of property values, and that makes sense. So, and again, there's just a huge amount of detail in terms of the demographics that you'll be able to go through. Jim asked me how much time I could spend, and I could actually go through this for hours with you, but I'll be kind. Looking at local government management, again, just the component questions, and you can see that you're well above those benchmarks as well. Leaders of trustworthy, well-managed services, well-trained employees, effective communication, money wisely spent, open to citizen ideas. So those are all solid scores. Certainly they could be higher. You're still in the 50 to 60 band. Lowest score, money wisely spent. So that's something to think about. Again, keeping in mind this is perception. So there are perception gaps and there are reality gaps. So is it a performance issue that you need to address, or is it a perception issue that you need to address? And that's something that you'll have to wrestle as you dive more deeply into the data. Public schools, an area you don't control directly, but certainly has a huge impact on the community and why people live here and why people leave. But you can see, again, Warren does have pretty good schools compared to the state, especially similarly sized communities. So you've got some strength there. And the scores are pretty even across those different questions. Transportation infrastructure. So you're a little bit below Michigan overall, a little bit above similarly sized communities. Road maintenance, it's one of your lower scores. Public transportation options, one of your lower scores. Road signage, one of your higher scores. But again, an area where a lot of them are in the 50 to 60 band, so areas that you want to think about, especially since transportation is one of the higher leveraged areas. In taxes, unusually, these are really good scores. Most of the time, we have far lower scores for taxes, but you can see what you look like compared to the different, the different indexes that we compare you with. Lowest areas, as with all of the indices, fairness of appraisals, fairness of tax levels, but you can see that you compare very favorably to those different benchmarks, especially compared to other large cities in Michigan. Areas where you're particularly strong. I wanted to point out the one on the far right, the quality received for taxes. So the question is really getting at, in more detail, this is just a shorthand version of it, are you getting your money's worth from the city? And so your residents are telling you that for the taxes they pay, they're getting pretty good services for the dollars that they pay. So that's a very positive thing. Okay, diving into some of the specific, city-specific services and programs. Looking at satisfaction, this is a 10-point scale. This is a pretty busy slide. There's a lot of information packed into it, but this is essentially taking a look at a number of the specific services for Warren in the maintenance category. The green and the blue is just to show you the differences in terms of the summary categories, so your eye can track more reliably. But you can see where your higher scores and your lower scores are. Some of the areas that tend to be higher are in public safety. Some of the areas that tend to be lower are things like the community development and code enforcement. So some of those various areas, and you can peruse that in more detail. General budget direction. So this is getting a sense for how residents generally want you to approach some of the budget decisions that you're looking at. So most folks agreed with two in particular: negotiate wage and benefit concessions from city employees. That was an area that had the most support in terms of the percentage of folks who checked the box saying, yes, they want you to focus on that. Next, consolidation with other local governments to eliminate duplicate efforts and get some administrative gains there. So people could choose the two that made the most sense. So that's why this equals more than 100% when you take a look at the two. And again, you've got the demographic detail of which groups responded which way. The next set of slides is going service by service, and we're asking a series of questions that are essentially along the lines of, if funds are not available to pay for each of the services below, how should that service be addressed? Should that service be eliminated? Should the service levels be reduced? Or should taxes be raised? How should that funding gap be closed? And so what these next set of slides are doing is showing you the percentage of folks who picked a particular option for that particular service. So here, if you're looking at eliminate the service, the number one score that about 38% said to eliminate, if they're in elimination mode, is to construct a new municipal court building, city rink. Those are the ones that really come out as far as being particularly high in the elimination if funds aren't available. And again, you've got the demographic detail to look into that. Reduce service levels. This is an area that has a lot more support generally as a concept than eliminating the services. So areas that are particularly strong from a reduced service levels, you have the library identified, a number of dimensions of library that are up around the 40% mark. And then you can see that there is that large swell of things around parks and recreation where there's generally more support. About a third of the respondents say service levels there can be reduced. Not eliminated, but reduced if funds aren't available. Raise taxes and fees. There are areas there that people are willing to pay for. You can see those high marks, particularly in public safety, the two that stand out in particular, firefighting services, neighborhood police patrols, looking at emergency medical services, emergency dispatch being particularly strong. Sanitation, rubbish pickup is another area that's above 25%. Then we asked about combining with another community for these different services. And I would like to point out that the scale on the right-hand side changes. So you can see here that the scale is 40% as far as raising taxes and fees. That jumps to 60% as the top of the scale on this one. So you can see generally there are a number of areas that do have some interest in terms of combining the services in some manner with other communities. So in terms of maintenance, the sewer services, water quality, those are some areas. Over in public safety, animal control, city jail, and you can read this just as readily as I can, but things like emergency dispatch, a number of the public safety services. Then over under sanitation, rubbish pickup, large item pickup, recycling programs also have a strong level of support in terms of consolidation or combining or some sort of joint services kind of solution. And the final option was outsourcing the service or privatizing. And so you can take a look at that and see where those spikes are as well. Snow removal services are pretty high, and then also over in the sanitation area, rubbish pickup, large item bulk pickup, and recycling are all pretty high there as well. The next chart really takes all of those graphs and summarizes them. And what works the best for me conceptually to think about these is this is really a pie chart for each service, showing you the percentage of folks who selected these different types of budgetary options to address each service. So you can see on the first one on the right, reliability of service of sewer service, you can see that the bulk of people, that purple mark, say combining with another community is really the approach that makes the most sense. And again, you've got the demographic details, so you can dive into that in more detail. And in the packets that you received, the very last page of your packet shows this chart a little bit larger, so it's easier to read. So a tool that's available to you. Just some other background. The American Customer Satisfaction Index is one of the tools that we use for the science that underlies this particular program. The ACSI measures not only local governments through Cobalt, but it also measures a number of different sectors across the U.S. And you can see what those scores look like on a 100-point scale, everything from banks to credit unions to utility services to airlines, to give you a sense for what your performance looks like compared to the private sector. Again, government is a very different kind of animal than private sector. You're providing a whole lot of services and not specializing in one. You're serving everyone. You don't get to pick a particular market. So there are some fundamental differences in terms of the types of organizations, but it does give you a sense for how some of these other areas are rated. Implementing results. As you look at these scores, one of the things that you'll want to really ask yourself is the score a result of perception or is it a result of performance, that we really aren't doing as well as we think we ought to? And the reason that's important is there's two different types of solutions you put in place depending on whether you have a perception issue or if you have an actual performance issue. If it's a perception issue, the result is more of a communications kind of strategy to make sure that the right information is out and do that kind of outreach and public education. If it's an issue of performance, then you really need to dive into those areas that are having the most impact and pulling your scores down, look at process mapping, look at re-engineering, those types of approaches so that you can fix that performance issue. And then once it's fixed, you still have the perception issue. So you need to wrap a communication strategy around that so people do know that you've made those changes, that the performance is now at a higher level. As far as a general approach to taking this data and making it live so it doesn't just stay here in the presentation and doesn't go any further, you've done the first step, which is the measurement. The second step is really building some internal teams to look at the results, look at a handful of areas that you really want to change the most. Get some flip charts out and brainstorm, why did people respond the way they did? That would be one list. And a second list would be, what can we do to lift those scores in the future? After you've got that pure brainstorm list set up of what to do, then start pulling together some work groups, line staff who are out there living it, resident work groups. Say, okay, here are the things that we're trying to change. Here's a list of some of the ideas that we came up with, what's missing, and what makes the most sense. And get to just those 2 or 3 things that are really going to drive some change and make the most sense on the ground. That's the step 3. Step 4 is training, giving the staff the tools and the training, the skills that they need to actually implement those changes. And step 5 is really the project management piece, the implementation, the boots on the ground, making sure that those changes are actually happening, that they're being measured on a monthly or a quarterly basis, that those results are flowing up to senior leadership within the city so you know that momentum is there, you know the change is happening, and that those things are being implemented. So again, what are the characteristics of an ideal community through residents' eyes? You've got a sense of priority, you've got a sense of the drivers for your residents, what are the things that they're particularly interested in, and your residents clearly want you to respond. They rate you very positively for the most part. You're not perfect, but you are very strong, and people are pretty proud of their hometown. So with that, are there any questions?
Seeing no questions, Mr. Hartley, do you have anything to add?
Just wanted to add one more component. Councilman Sadowski was very instrumental in the formulation of the questions that we had for this survey, because he wanted to make it very abundantly clear to average residents that we don't get all of our funding from the same place. So for instance, the general fund takes care of important things like police and fire, maintenance of different aspects of everyday life. But we also have a dedicated sanitation millage, which pays strictly for sanitation, recycling. We also have a Parks and Recreation millage, which pays specifically for Parks and Rec. And you'll notice that the breakdown, and if you go back, by the way, I made it so that the very last page of the handout that you have contains the preferred options for all services, and I enlarged it for you because there's a lot of detail in there. But this slide here really breaks down, as Mr. St. Amour said, all the different preferred options that we're being told by the people who filled out the survey, but it's also broken down by those very different aspects: sanitation, library. So keep in mind, obviously, as stakeholders, and I would encourage residents to also always keep in mind that having the city ice rink will never affect how many police officers we have on the street, or the level of sanitation, or whether or not your library will remain open, because those are all interdependent. Funding sources. So keep that in mind. The way the question was phrased, by the way, is if there is not adequate funding to provide each service below, please specify the budgetary actions you would support for each service below, and which are all supported by general fund tax revenues, which is what we did for the general fund. Then when we got to the Parks and Rec, sanitation, and library, it was made abundantly clear that those are separate funding units. So I just wanted to point that out, that those were the wishes of council. Councilman Sadowski made that very clear, that it should be broken down that way. William St. Amour, who was present that day, made sure that he formulated and customized the City of Warren survey so it would break that down for you, and indeed that's how the results came out. So I thought I'd mention that for clarification, but other than that, unless you have any more questions.
Mr. Hartley, I thank you very much. It provides an interesting perspective for all of us to observe, maybe try to meet, and decide the future for the City of Warren. Any questions, comments? If not, we'll go to the next item. Thank you, Mr. Amour. Thank you, Mr. Hartley.
It's my pleasure.
The next item is 8B, presentation by City Stat Coordinator and SEMCOG INRAE Regional and Local Fiscal Forecast and Analysis.
Mr. Hartley, you have the floor.
Thank you again, members of council. You just saw a presentation that really went into detail as to a particular aspect of what's important to the city, which is how our citizens engage in the development of the city and how we face our fiscal crisis. Again, 3 years ago, when Mayor Fouts wanted to start a performance measurement system of government through CityStat, we engaged with Dave Berger, who is the director of SEMCOG's local efficiency and effectiveness team, which now consists of 4 members. All of those members have served in both private sector and public sector employment over their history, and they're rich in their individual abilities. We have Ray Riggs, for instance, who specializes as a former fireman in police and fire and public safety issues, dispatch. Dave Berger, who I've invited to present a fiscal update and a regional update to you from SEMCOG, came to us 3 years ago when I first got here, came to council and advised on the storm that was brewing and some of the tools that we would need to go forward. One of those tools, obviously, was the Cobalt survey. Benchmarking is pivotal. The different methodology that he was recommending and his team on how local governments could deal with this. We've been members of SEMCOG. The City of Warren's been members of SEMCOG for many, many years. It's always been more of a think tank, provided different data, and I don't think a whole lot of attention was paid to the resources that SEMCOG has. And until they created the local government effectiveness and efficiency team and hired Dave Berger, they've really become shifted gears so that they could support cities throughout the region with this very task. And I was proud that one of my first meetings personally here was with Dave Berger, and he attended and his team attended many of our early CityStat meetings. The presentation you heard earlier on the water department, it seems like a million years ago, but it was just 3 short years ago that we were examining very forensically what was going on in the water department and some of the other areas, and it was Dave's team that kind of helped steer us in the areas of benchmarking and consolidations of departments and things. Dave Berger is a a former Ford Motor Company executive who retired and became the elected mayor of the city of Orchard Lake. He was term limited and ultimately became the director of SEMCOG's team. And he joins us now. I made a presentation to put this presentation together so that we could effectively give you all the tools in your toolbox that you will need as a new council to take things like the survey and other avenues that you may have at your disposal. And Dave will take us on a little bit of a tour of where we've been and where we may want to go. Dave?
With permission, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Good evening, and congratulations on your re-elections or your new elections. So that's real impressive team up there. I'm really pleased with the changes that are in place. SEMCOG has been around for 40 years, so I'll give you a quick overview, but one of you better pay a little more attention than the rest of you, because I understand your next agenda item is to elect a delegate to SEMCOG. And I'll be sticking around for that and be sharing that information with the SEMCOG folks so that our records are up to date. So we're looking forward to working with one of you as much more closely. I'll be providing a brief overview of SEMCOG, and that delegate will have a much larger understanding over time, and I look forward to that process. We have some updated economic projections that are just out that will help you guide you for the future in terms of your future revenue, anticipated revenues. That translates into a fiscal forecast that we've kind of done on the back of an envelope for the city of Warren that helps the city move forward with their own internal detailed budgeting and forecasting process. We have some comparable data, a lot more that's available than we're sharing tonight. It's on our website, and your own dashboard and citizen guide that you have on your website now that you did to qualify for EVIP, the Economic Vitality Incentive Program, accessible right on your website, has a wealth of information that I won't take time tonight to share with that. Jim tells me that that's something for a future council meeting for a better understanding, and I'd recommend you do that, especially as you move into the next step, which is shared services and employee compensation factors. We want to make sure that you avoid fiscal distress. There's a lot of things in the news now about emergency managers, and there's new legislation, and Flint just now going into that or potentially going into that. It's important to understand the factors there. And finally, sharing some fiscal best practices to help you understand what other communities around the region are doing. So that's our agenda. Our SEMCOG is made up of 159 member communities, one of which is, of course, Warren, made up in the 7 counties of southeastern Michigan. It represents literally half of the population of Michigan. We've been around for 40 years, and we work with our local government partners on dealing with issues. We plan for the common needs of the region, identifying opportunities, facilitate cooperation among governments, and also advocate for change both in Lansing and in Washington, D.C. Now, with the region's challenges in front of us, our role is becoming even more and more important to bridge some of the gaps and address some of the issues that are facing this region. We have 9 different service areas. We started with, again, transportation planning 40 years ago, grew into the economic development and regional growth areas. Then the environmental areas is in the middle here, and then finally in the efficiency area, the education and the advocacy areas. We'll focus tonight on the efficiency areas. That's the area I lead at SEMCOG, and I'll be sharing with you some of our best practices and findings in that area. You're probably all familiar with the SEMCOG primary website. One step beyond that website is this page, which focuses on efficient and collaborative government. There's several different indicators that you can click on to get a wealth of data on internal efficiencies, collaboration, major restructuring, which a lot of our communities are going through with 20-30% drops in revenues, and a very thorough database of both fiscal data, which is where the data that you have on, you developed your dashboard and your Citizens Guide came from, by the way, and also AgileGov, which is a documentation, a searchable database of hundreds and hundreds of successfully implemented ideas from around the region, including many from Warren. So when we see some of the successes here in Warren, we document them, work with Jim to document those in our database so that others can see what you're accomplishing, and Jim gets his calls from other communities on how you do city stat or how you do this, and there's a lot of collaboration going on in that regard. Bottom line, SIMCOG's member services are, we're here to help your community run more efficiently, how to make your community greener in the environmental factors, how to make your community more desirable in the economic development and growth area, and how to become better leaders. And whoever your delegate is, that's an opportunity, a real growth opportunity for, and I encourage you to engage actively with SIMCOG and strive for learning all you can and take advantage of all the opportunities that present themselves and your networking opportunities that also SIMCOG involvement pertains to. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts here. This reflects home pricing indexes for various metro regions around the country. We just got this data. It's the Detroit area is shown in red at the bottom. Everybody is standardized to 100, an index of 100 back in 2000. That's the beginning of this decade, and a little bit more than that now, 11, 12 years. So everybody starts there, and you can see what happened to the Detroit area. It grew a little bit in early stages of the decade, but then it fell off the cliff and went down altogether about 33% since 2000. Now the other communities, other regions around the country, the other metro areas, rose much more dramatically and fell dramatically, but none of them, hardly any of them, have dropped below where they were in 2000, like the Detroit area. They've at best, at worst, come back to where they kind of were. So this is what's driving your problems and every other of the communities here in southeastern Michigan dropping your revenues and creating the fiscal challenges that you're facing. House prices are one part of your revenue equation. The other part are the commercial and industrial aspects. And the city of Warren has a lot of those. It's not a bedroom community, but although you've got a good mix of that. It's an important factor to also understand. And the story is similar here. We have regional data here. We don't have the ability to look in metropolitan areas. But you can see, unfortunately, the Midwest composite is below the other regions of the world. So we're also getting hit on the industrial and commercial sides as well. Now, this also says there's other risks facing you. You've probably read about, or if you haven't, there's work underway at the legislation in Lansing to eliminate the personal property tax. We talked about real estate property. This is the building, the land, and all that for your residential and commercial and industrial base. But the content of the commercial and industrial base of those facilities are taxed at a different rate and a different schedule called personal property tax. The governor is encouraging legislation to consider elimination of that approach. If that were to happen, the more industrial-based communities like Warren and the ones you see here would have a significant impact on your revenues. As a result, Mayor Fouts has been very actively involved in two different task forces that are addressing how to deal with this kind of a situation and working with Lansing and SEMCOG and the Macomb area regional collaboration group to try to find a win-win solution here. And their work is still in progress, and we were pleased that the governor announced that he wanted to delay the deliberations on this until after the first of the year so they can collect more data from local governments to do this. This apparently, some of the states, Ohio, for example, has done this, so there's some neighboring communities that are challenging this. So that would be a big factor for a community like Warren. On the other hand, it helps your businesses, and so it might help them to grow, and that's the logic, and we're trying to find a win-win solution here. Another major risk that you should be aware of is the state tax tribunal risk I know your city has quantified your specific risks, but by and large, there are 40,000 appeals out there, and most of them are, some are residential, but most of them are commercial and industrial. And there's a big backlog, a 3 to 4 year backlog, and unfortunately, 62% are being ruled in favor of the property owner as of most recent readings, which is does not bode well for future projections for taxable values. So many communities are setting aside funds to cover these risks, and I would encourage you to consider that as well here in Warren. Now, what does this all mean? This means relative to your taxable values, they are continuing to drop and are projected to continue to drop another 3 years. You can see in the early part of the decade things were cooking along, but then it fell off a cliff in 2008 and beyond. Saw some double-digit drops, and the next 3 years are projected to be, in aggregate, about 5%. Now, that's the region-wide. That's not Warren. Now, what your the financial department here will look at and the assessing department will look at your performance relative to the historical levels, and if you're better than or worse than, they will be able to take this data and make their own internal forecast. They work very closely with the county assessor, and they'll have internal detailed forecasts that support your budgeting process. But this just gives you a sense that the end is not near. There's always a lag time in terms of assessed values compared to what's happening in the real estate market, unfortunately. So the impact, and you've, as a city of Warren, seen many of these. Your property tax collections are dropping anywhere from 20 to 50%. One of your neighboring communities, East Point, has dropped 50%, literally, which is really a challenge for them. 20% is a real challenge, but 50%. State and federal funds are being cut, the revenue sharing and so forth. Credit ratings are being reduced across the region. The services are being curtailed or eliminated. Office hours restricted, the furlough days. Pay and benefit cuts are prevalent. Layoffs, early retirements, legacy costs are inadequately funded. Capital expenditures are being cut. Infrastructure deteriorating. I was really pleased about the water budget proposal, that the infrastructure expenditures there are actually increasing by, I think, $500,000. That's a recognizing this situation and dealing with it, because that's going to help you drive your losses and your ability to balance your budget. Some communities have had some successful millage and fee increases, but it's somewhat limited in terms of those communities that have taken that action. So bottom line, major deficits. We see revenues dropping in the green. We see expenses due to economic factors and inflation still going up. That spells disaster for your fund balance, and it goes into negative territory. A community like this would, at the end of this period, have an emergency manager running the show. And we're here to help make sure none of our members fall into that trap. And so, fortunately, Warren, this is your actual results over the last 3 to 4 years, where you can see the revenues have dropped, pretty much like was forecasted, dropping over that period. And you fortunately managed your expenses to be closer to the revenue level, but your fund balance did deteriorate. But you had a healthy fund balance at the beginning of this period. It was a rainy day fund. It was raining out pretty heavily. You used it, rightfully so, but you're probably bottomed out right now. And the challenge I leave for you is, and I'll explain it in the next slide, you can see that line flattening out here in 2011, 12, 13, 14. It's important that you have a balanced budget and no longer pull from your fund balance. And that's going to be a real challenge with revenues to continue to drop as we forecasted. That's going to be the real challenge for you, and I'll tell you why you don't want that to happen. First of all, the Michigan Treasury, the emergency manager, there's categories that they have if they have a 9-point rating scale. The higher the number, the worse the condition of the communities. You are, I'll show you where your rating is, but if you're in the fiscally neutral phase, the 0 to 4 range, and no state action is needed. The next section, if you're a 5 to 7 rating, and they do this annually, it's a fiscal watch where the unit of government is notified of its relatively high score and it's put on a watch list. And 8 to 10 is where action's taken, where an emergency manager is appointed and all those sort of things to take care of and you've been reading about. Now, here's Warren's score on the 9 factors. I won't go through the 9 factors, but you're a 4, 1 below that watch area. And the 4 factors that you're given points for that add to this is your population's declining. Now that's every community literally in almost Michigan is in that same boat, so there's nobody that's a 0 anymore. Your real taxable value is dropping. That's true for every other community as well. So those are 2 automatic things that almost every community in the state is facing. So that's there that's just there, you accept those sort of things. The other one is the general fund operating deficit. That means you're using your deficit. That's what that general fund is depleting because you're not balancing expenses and revenues quite yet. That's going to have to change or that's going to be instated because it's 2 years in a row, the prior year and the future year, and then the size of the general fund balance. All those could be into 1s, and you take the 4 you have today and you add another point or 2 and you could be into a 6. That would put you back in that watch area, and I encourage you to avoid that. Now, each of these 9 factors, some you can control and some you can't. Let's look at the ones you can control. Fund expenditures and operating millage. Those are really the only 2 things you can do short term. There's some longer term things like fund revenues and fund balance activity and deficits and so forth, and debt, restructuring debt. But there's things you can't control like economic inflation and population and things like that. So you have to focus on, you definitely want to avoid going any further than you are. Now, I talked about funds I shared with you later were the general fund. We've since developed a more broader perspective in our targeting, and your dashboard includes the more broader perspective to all the funds. As described earlier, your police and fire have separate millages and so forth. We kind of look at the entire breadbasket full of services and all the revenue sources, and that's what's reflected here. And things look a little more healthier there because you've designated out of your general fund these other fund balances that are somewhat designated. So when you look at that, you can see your revenues again in green and your expenses in red are somewhat more balanced, and your fund balances are more healthy. So which is good. I think you've designated your fund balances to a larger, to specified things. So overall, this is a very good situation for you, and work hard to maintain this kind of level of fund balance and balancing your budgets. Now, let's take an area that is very important to all of you, and that's public safety. Here's the trend of your public safety expenses over the last several years in terms of cost per resident. We look at this data on a cost per resident standpoint because that's a way to compare different communities to different communities. Your cost per resident for police is $295, for fires $172, and for the court is $48 per capita. That's the cost per the average citizen pays towards those. The average taxpayer pays towards that service on an annual basis. And we have a lot of data from a lot of different communities that says how you compare to the benchmarks. And by and large, you're a little over the benchmarks by about consistently 10 to 15%. So there is opportunity to get to the benchmarks. And the benchmarks are the best communities we found nationwide that both from a cost perspective and a satisfaction perspective, like William was describing. So that benchmark shows that you have some room to move and some areas for opportunity. We also have detailed operational benchmarks. For example, this is fire and EMS. You can see again, the first one is the fire and EMS cost per capita. The last one is the fire and EMS citizen satisfaction, and a whole bunch of metrics in between, like response times and those sort of things that CityStat measures the performance of the fire and EMS system against this and then can say where the opportunities are and where the gaps are and address the issues. That's how the water department and the water and sewer department got so efficient as described in the mayor's presentation earlier. Now, personnel is always the first place everybody looks to, reducing personnel. So we have benchmark data there, and we look at that also on a ratio of full-time equivalent per 1,000 residents. And I'll just point to the bottom line here. Citywide, Warren is at 5.3 employees. This is full-time equivalent employees, includes overtime and things like that. Employees per 1,000 residents. Southeastern Michigan as a whole is 8.4. The national average is 10.1. The benchmarks, the best communities we found, is 5.7, average of the best 20. So you do not have a staffing problem. You do not have a staffing problem. But you still have those benchmark gaps. So that's where you're working very hard to do. The benchmark gaps are the other side of that equation. It's not the number of personnel you have, it's the overall compensation that's involved in that. And that's the areas that I know your administration is working very hard to address. That's why the legislation is the third phase of the Economic Vitality Incentive Program. It addresses employee compensation because that's prominent across the whole region. Everybody has a big gap due to probably not so much salaries, but mostly on the benefits side. And that's a situation that, unfortunately, with the auto industry here, to be competitive, everybody had to get to that stage, and now we're facing that music. So how do you avoid fiscal distress? SEMCOG has a kind of a cookie-cutter approach that we recommend our cities do. Develop a multi-year financial forecast, not just a one-year budget, but even multi-year budgeting, but at least looking out 3 years. Engage your stakeholders through surveys and other features and functions. Develop and implement aggressive cost savings ideas. You saw that in the water department. You see it in the mayor's State of the City address every year. We take those ideas and we dump them right into our Agile Gov database so that we have others can leverage and learn from those experiences. Assess service cuts in selective areas. These survey data that William just shared with you might give you some insight into, will definitely give you some insight into where to take some savings. Measure and performance and close the benchmarking gaps. That's what CityStat does for you. Reduce expenses to match revenues so that fund balance stays the same. Collaborate with neighboring communities. That also is encouraged from the survey, as you saw. So, and you're working very hard with what's called MACRO, the Macomb Area Regional Collaborative Organization, made up of 11 communities, including Warren. I'm part of that team. Jim is too, and we meet monthly to go through a number of different potential collaboration opportunities. Stay tuned in what's going on there. It's a very effective team. Always be looking 2 to 3 years out in terms of your process and providing steadfast leadership. And I want to touch on that just a second. I'm going to focus on the left side, where stakeholder input is always solicited, full disclosure and transparency. Your citizen guide and dashboard do that for you. Willingness to collaborate with neighboring communities and internally. Measuring your performance, closing your benchmark gaps and identify them. Cultural change. Financial planning, looking in the future. Dynamic leadership. Communicate, communicate, communicate. So I won't focus on the right side. We see some of these traits, but they're getting fewer and fewer, and I don't see them here in Warren. Fiscal best practices, I won't go into a lot of details here. They're listed for you, but these are the kinds of examples of things that many of our communities have been doing or are doing. You can pick from this list. You've got 2 pages of them here, and the administration has taken this kind of data and acting upon it, and you saw some of that in the water presentation of consolidating departments and structure and reducing this, that, and whatever to address the budget issues. Here's some more areas of opportunities. And collaboration, by the way, will save you 30% if you can get all the details worked out. And we have 700 successes documented in our Agile Gov database, many of which here are Warren examples I cited earlier, so you can search that at your leisure. Final thoughts: expanding CityStat and QAlert to drive efficiencies, productivity, and performance measurement is recommended. Jim is leading that effort. You saw the examples in the water department. I'd like to see those kind of examples in every one of your departments in another year. Resizing, restructuring, collaborating, consolidating, privatizing, you name it. There are reducing services selectively. There's a number of different things to be done there, and I know the administration is focusing on that. Engaging all the stakeholders, including the important elected officials, and leading effectively. Appreciate the opportunity. Are there any questions?
I do have just one, going to the Warren's current fiscal score.
Yes.
How does any community avoid at least 2 or 3? Are there communities that scored 0?
There were up until a year or 2 ago, but
Oh, that's my point.
there's none left, no.
Okay.
They're all 2.
Oh, okay, and is that so much in regards to the first 2 factors,
Yes.
generally speaking? All right, so you can't avoid 2, and then there's the other 2 we can avoid in regards to proper planning.
Balancing your budget without tapping the fund balance now, especially that it's down to where it is going to be a real challenge, but that's an important factor.
Hopefully it doesn't rain so hard. Thank you. Anybody else? If not, Mr. Hartley, you want to conclude?
Just wanted to clear up 2 or 3 quick things. Obviously, this promotes a data-driven approach that we've tried to embark upon. We want to be able to give you all the evidence you need to say we're delivering services in a particular way, at a cost-effective way. And that's what the data-driven approach is. That's what Q-Alert is all about, and that's what you'll be receiving from me, and Mayor will be providing you with updates going into the budgetary process. Some information I hadn't provided with Dave prior to this. If you go back to this this slide here on the, obviously we saw when, as Dave said, we dropped off a cliff in 2008. And if you look at the white box there, that's your last 4 years, folks. Now, it appears it's getting better, and it may, but it's only going to basically get back to 0 anytime soon. We're not going to see any appreciation. There's not going to be extra money laying around anytime soon. So that's a world that we live in. I would also add that upon conversation as of today with the assessing department, they are projecting, because of course this is a regional average, they are projecting that the 2012 budget year is actually going, for the city of Warren, the county is estimating 10 to 12%, not 2.8%. So a community like Macomb Township or one of these newer communities, they're only going to lose 3%. Warren's probably going to lose closer to 10 to 12%. And on the commercial side, the projections are coming in at 12 to 14%. So though this tells the story for the region, and it certainly tells our story, but we have to worry about things like a large commercial base and things like that. The only last part that I wanted to state, Dave Berger mentioned a couple of times about the fund balance. You know, we've tried to close the gap in the budgetary shortfalls with the fund balance, and we've done that using those rainy day funds in a very limited manner. As you saw with the water budget, we actually returned a great deal of money back to the water budget. So overall, when you look at all the different funds, we haven't really dipped that low, but the one that matters the most, of course, is the general fund balance, and as Dave has mentioned, it's a very important factor. It hasn't bottomed out in that it's 0. Dave used that term. I should clarify. It's bottomed out in that most experts, and Dave would agree, believe that for bonding purposes and other fiscally responsible reasons, it just isn't prudent to dip into it a whole lot more than we already have. We are closing the gap, as the mayor has mentioned many times. Each budget year, we're returning a sizable amount of money that we didn't spend in that budget year. So again, thank you to to the members of council who supported us in our initiatives. And we're going to be coming up with many more. The collaborations that we embarked upon 3 years ago, and make no mistake about it, Dave Berger was with me when we attempted to speak very quietly to one of our neighboring communities that they were receptive to certain things, and then there became a political climate where that wasn't acceptable. And I think that most communities now are seeing that they have to collaborate. And now, of course, we have the Economic Vitality Incentive Program that actually attaches money to it. So it's something that we have to do, and we will be doing. The other important factor are consolidations, and consolidations are considered just as important as collaborations, in that we have to take the way we've built this city up over 50 years to be the way it is, and we have to look at areas where maybe we could more smartly organize our structure, organize our workforce, so that everybody can spread the work out more evenly and we can survive. So I just wanted to clarify a couple of those points. Thank you for your help, and I will be at your disposal for any information that you need, and Dave Berger is not far away either. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there a motion to receive and file the information?
Cecil?
Yes, Mr.
I have just one question for Mr.
Go ahead, Mr. Hartley, please hold.
As part of Mr. Berger's presentation, you know, he had talked about doing 2- and 3-year budgets. And when will we start to see that?
Well, that would actually be a question for our budget director or controller's office. It is not a, we do informal budget projections, but we don't do what is traditionally known as a 3-year budget like you see in Oakland County, where they actually budget for 3 years into the future. Obviously, one of the advantages to that is if there's a department that knows that they need a new truck, they might not buy it this year because they know that it's actually in the budget that's 2 years from now, and there might be light at the end of the tunnel. But it's also very difficult to know where we stand budgetarily from one year to the next with revenues the way they are, as I stated. Some of these projections are, now that we're getting the numbers in, they're actually coming in differently than they were in the past. We're also returning money that we're not using back to the general fund.
Part of the reason why I bring that up is because in the water budget, we're talking about a lot of capital outlay that's going to be happening over several years. With the road millage that we've put in place now for the next 5 years, we're going to be talking about that. Now, granted, we can budget for those particular departments and do that well over the next 5 years, but it would be nice to be able to do that at least 2 and even 3 years ahead. And I hope that's something that you, as well as the administration, takes that suggestion and let it carry a lot of weight, because that's something that performance and being able to see what we're going to do with particular funds over the next 2, even 3 years is helpful for us when we go ahead to make decisions. So,
yeah, the only thing I could say about that is that it's not a practice that has been grasped by a lot of communities due to how involved of a process it is. But other than that, I agree with you. It certainly has its merits. The concept of it has its merits.
I mean, I know from the standpoint that right now, even though we're talking about the water budget, most of the department heads are starting to prepare their budget, because in January they start to meet with the mayor on that. And again, that process happens throughout the whole year. It seems like we pass a budget and then we go ahead and we start into that. And again, it's just something I'd like to see implemented and put into place. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Bacamino.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Hartley, thanks again. I know in the past we've tried to collaborate with certain cities and met resistance. Are we currently, I know Mr. Berger mentioned, you know, East Detroit is 50% down. Are we currently, you don't have to mention the cities, but are we reaching out to other cities? I know we've done some stuff with Sterling Heights, small detail, but are we at least have a door open and reaching out to our cities that abut our boundaries?
Well, Mayor Fouts makes it clear with anyone in the sound of his voice that we are open to collaboration. He spares no opportunity to do that. I have personally been, as Dave mentioned, to macro. We get together regularly and discuss these opportunities. I can say that we've had dialogue with every community that touches our border, and that includes communities that are even in Oakland County. We're not looking at things because we're in the same county. We're looking at things because they're practical.
That's what I was looking for, to see that we are reaching out even into the other
Absolutely.
counties. Thank you.
Mr. Warner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Harley, just a comment on both presentations going hand in hand. The Cobalt presentation especially would affect the decision-making by this administration and what direction the citizens feel this city should go and where cuts should be made or shouldn't be made. And I think this is going to be beneficial for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's no one else, Mr. Hartley, I want to, and I know Mr. Stevens had mentioned it in his press releases or in regards to Macomb Daily when running for office, and Mr. Sadowski brought it up. What I think was illuminating tonight is they provided us the percentage of lack of growth. And with that, we can get an idea of property tax revenues under that particular line item, and that's, you know, what, 80% of our income, and knowing with those, that type, and I'm just guessing because I haven't done the formula, I haven't seen a budget in a few years, but it gives us a good idea of where we're going to have to be in the future in regards to expenditures. We see the expenditures as well, but with this kind of information, it gives us an idea of where we have to be, and that's maybe where we can start looking about where we're going to have to be in the future. I don't believe that we've seen, you know, during my years of council, this is why it's so different, we didn't see the decline in growth of property values. Now we are, and I think that's why it takes a different approach to it, and we're going to have to change things a little bit, at least to know what we're working with. And I'm sure with your help, with these kinds of numbers, this is what makes it so, makes the ability to plan. And what the mayor has been doing, and what we've seen in the water department, and the attempts. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
If I could sum that up, Mr. President, by saying that it's the one concept that we've been engaged in is what's now become right-sizing of government. It's not downsizing or upsizing, it's right-sizing, because what we've learned is that there are areas that, you know, you can adjust without making serious consequence to our employees, but also benefit the delivery of service and even enhance the delivery of service. So it's not all doom and gloom, it's just a new way of looking at the government that has built up over the past 50 years. And as our citizens say, we're doing a pretty good job of it, we've just got to survive it.
Yeah, we better adapt, because if you don't adapt, you become extinct. So with that, we have a motion to receive and file.
Receive and file.
Motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next item, Mr. Chairman.
Next item is 8C, request to designate a member of City Council to serve as delegate to the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, General Assembly.
Mr. President,
Mr. Warner.
I would nominate Scott Stevens.
And I would second that.
Any further nominations?
I would decline that nomination and nominate Patrick Green.
Okay, there's a motion by Stevens for Green. Any support? Support by Mr. Bacamino. Any discussion? Well, maybe so much we're going to accept. All right, that's good. Good start with discussion this time.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stevens.
I just wanted to thank my colleagues for their nomination and support, but my plate is full, and so that's why I decided to support Mr. Green's nomination. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Thank you.
Motion to close nominations.
So moved.
Support. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Everybody in favor of Mr. Green, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Green. We'll go on to the next item.
Item 8D, reappointment of James P. Hartley as alternate delegate to the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, General Assembly.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Bacamino, support by Mr. Stevens. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Welcome, Mr. Hartley, as the alternate delegate. Next item.
Next item is 8E, consideration and adoption of a resolution to approve the assignment and assumption of contract between the City of Warren and Great Lakes Paper Stock Corporation to Ray Community Great Lakes LLC for disposal of recyclable material.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Green,
Support with discussion.
support by Mr. Sadowski. Mr. Sadowski.
Who do we have here today to speak on this issue?
Mr. Mione
Very
and
good.
Mr. Ganem. Is that got a break?
Slow that guy down.
Now let's see him get back uphill.
Yeah, there's
Wheelie all the way down, I'd be impressed. Could you turn your mic on, Mr. Ganem? Thank you.
Good evening.
A couple of questions. Are there any changes to this contract?
No.
I was actually surprised when I saw that this operation had been sold, because I thought this was very lucrative for Great Lakes, and having it now under a different company, I was again surprised to see that. The one concern that I have is we currently now have the operation located in Roseville, which is very convenient for us, with the new company having two other operations within the state of Michigan. One, is it in Flint, and where's the third one?
Where's the third one? Southfield and Ann Arbor. And New Boston.
Okay, there isn't one in Flint then?
Great Lakes Recycling.
We have two representatives from Great Lakes here. I can tell you, Mr. Sadowski, the operation is not changing. We're going to still go to the same facility. We're still dumping at the same spot. Our facility is not going to change.
And that was the concern that I had, is that often what happens is as these local facilities get gobbled up, usually what ends up happening is that there becomes some contraction, and they'll close facilities, move the equipment to another community, or move it into Roseville. And I know for us, the transportation cost would dramatically affect our formula for recycling. And obviously, it's convenient being right next door.
No, we have no plans on moving, spots. I think we'll be delivering there for the next 2 years, I believe. We have another one-way option that the council put in place, 3 years ago. So hopefully we'll be exercising that option also, and we'll be delivering it to the facility on Groesbeck until we bid it out in 2 years from now. And there is other recycling facilities available in the Tri-County area that we can go to. I mean, we could, when we bid it out, of course, they'll be bidding on it too.
To the two representatives, then, what would prevent you, and Mr. Ganem, this question will be also to you, what would prevent you from closing the facility? And I guess, do we have
Mr. Mione here from Great Lakes Recycling? You can.
No, we have no intention of closing the facility. We still own the property, the building. Great Lakes wasn't looking to pass on the single stream operation that we took a lot of pride in the last 7 years of building, but Great Lakes wasn't even looking, but they found a good company with a recycling revolutionary model that will even be more effective. And Great Lakes will stay in the recycling business, but direct their attention in other areas. So, but I just kind of wanted to formally introduce a representative from ReCommunity here. Dan Kurtz is a regional operational manager, and if you have any other questions for him, feel free to do that. Or
Okay. Mr. President, I'm done with my questions. Thank you.
I would also like to add, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that Great Lakes Recycling has now opened a newly recycling part of their business in Warren. They are now Warren business. They opened up a recycling business to do hardwire, I believe, right?
Yeah, wire chopping system, just a different segment of our metal business, so. And we're excited.
That's the property that we gave the tax abatement on about
Yes.
a month or
Yes,
two
that's
ago.
correct. You're correct.
So that's good news. We have new, Mr. Sadowski, we have no plans of moving the operation for the next 2 years.
Any further discussion from council?
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ganem, Mr. Meoni. Is it Mr. Kurtz?
Kurtz, yeah.
Kurtz, welcome. The only thing I had was that the scope of work is going to remain the same. We've got the one-year extension we just did, and then the option for another one at that point. Look forward to working with you and keeping everything status quo.
Yeah, and Mr. Green, our other operations are still going to reside in Roseville there.
Mhm.
Just a segment of our property is.
Segment of
going
all
to
those
be-
buildings.
Yep, it's just going to be the single stream. Of course, you have a packet, the single stream and the old corrugated cardboard. So we're neighboring each other. We own all that.
I remember we had a spirited debate over the contract, I think in '07 or '08, and
08.
It's worked out very well for us, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah, yes, it has.
Good, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you.
Mr. Sadowski?
Pat, you actually reminded me of something. Great Lakes had put into place or had indicated that they were going to do a real strong educational program and didn't, I don't know from what effect, we didn't see a lot of that that came out. Is there anything that new that's going to come out in promoting recycling and education through your company?
One of our strong suits is community collaboration and public-private partnerships. And one of the things that obviously drives our business is growth in recycling and diversion rates. And a key component of that is education and community outreach. So that'll definitely be a big part of what we do as a company.
One of the things that Mr. Ganem assisted me, I don't know, about 6 months ago, where we spoke at one of the elementary schools. Yes. They actually got involved in doing recycling, where City of Warren picks up their recycling there at the school. And we gave it was about a half-hour, 45-minute presentation to the students, and it was great. And we'd certainly, as those requests come in, would like to bring representatives to the company in and try to create some more excitement. So
we'd be honored.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Werner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To expand on what Mr. Sadowski said, I was recently contacted by a school, and when this came up, talking to Mr. Ganem, I was going to see if there was a push to increase participation, because this school had contacted me about possibly coming in and doing the same type of presentation that Mr. Sadowski had done. So I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think I can positively say this. Back in 2007, we started this program. Mr. Sabal put a pretty good program together through the water bills and through some other advertising we did. We have grown recycling, and through the mayor's office. The mayor himself has given out over 1,000 recycling bins since we started the program, with Great Lakes. And those recycling bins are usually taken by new members of the community. And we've increased our recycling from, I believe, 3,600 tons almost to 6,000 tons. So we have almost doubled our recycling protocol, and we are going to continue to do that until hopefully we get more than 60 or 70% of the city recycling, which would pay for itself.
That would be an ideal goal.
That would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Ganem.
President Bacamino.
Mr. Bacamino.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ganem, too, I know you've increased with Great Lakes curbside pickup at schools and organizations, yes. Mine being one of them, and I know that is educational for the students, but it's also increased our recycling. A lot of that bulk recycled from schools ended up in the trash, especially some of the items that you get every day for food services and that. But are we continuing to get the schools on board, or I know we are picking up quite a bit from before the schools and organizations.
Mr. Bacamino, your school has done an outstanding job. I think that the school and me and Mr. Stowski are doing a great job. Hopefully we'll bring in some more. If any of the teachers are out there from these surrounding schools, we do pick up a lot of Warren schools already, along with Jerry Green and his presidency. We pick up some of the high schools over in his area. We'd be willing to take on any school. We were talking to, believe it or not, the hospital, St. John's Hospital, to recycle. We almost got into a program with them. I worked on it real hard. It was real close, and somebody went and got them. So we didn't get them, but those are the type of things we're looking for. If you're in the city of Warren and we have an opportunity like through a school or a college, we'd love to pick you up. Just give me a call, and I'd be happy to meet with you.
Mr. President.
Ms. Clegio.
Just a quick question for Mr. Ganem. Mr. Ganem, if I'm reading correctly on here, we extended the bid October 22nd, and then they transferred, they changed, owners November 1st, correct? We didn't know at the time that we extended the bid that a new company was coming in and, taking over, correct?
No, basically, this bid was an automatic extension.
Great.
The old council made it a one-way street, basically. It was our say-so whether we want to extend it or not, and Great Lakes is already basically said that they would extend it no matter what. So, yeah, it was an automatic renewal.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
In regard, I have one question for Judge Biernat. Legally speaking, as an attorney, we always have to look at the downside. In fact, we seem to have someone else, for lack of a better term, on the hook because the assignment doesn't release anybody, it just provides an additional party. Is that correct? That is correct. I'll question the motion. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Sadowski?
Yes.
Mr. Bacamino?
Yes.
Ms. Clegio?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Warner?
Yes.
Mr. St. Pierre, yes. Item passes. Congratulations, Mr. Ganem.
Next item is item 8F, consideration and adoption of a resolution authorizing the mayor and clerk to execute the search and rescue emergency response vehicle interlocal agreement between Oakland County and the city of Warren.
Motion approved. Discussion.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Green, support by Mr. Stevens. Discussion, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner McAdams, would you please give us an overview of what we're doing here?
Yes, what's before you this evening is a interlocal contract between the City of Warren and Oakland County, specifically addressing the M1 task force. That's the technical rescue component for the Tri-County area. A couple of months ago, Council passed an interlocal agreement which created a technical rescue and hazardous material task force between Warren, Sterling Heights, Clinton Township, Shelby Township, and the County of Macomb. This is an additional layer and a step up that allows us to work with Oakland County and allows members of our community, City of Warren, to use equipment that's owned by Oakland County. So essentially, if we have a large-scale technical rescue event in our community and the task force is activated, employees of the City of Warren can utilize Oakland County equipment in our community. And we also have one member currently who's on that team, and that component could expand over the years, and this contract provides for that possibility.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm finished, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Stevens, thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. And this equipment is a whole gambit of different equipment. I see confined space, trench rescue. Now, with the trench rescue, have we been training with, say, our Vector crews in the city?
That's the component that we haven't trained with City of Warren vector crews, but we are going to purchase, actually the new consortium with the Macomb County Consortium that we've created has trained DPW personnel on the use of vectoring trucks in trench rescue situations. We have not trained to date any City of Warren personnel, but we hope in the future to do that. As we, as well as being part of this larger task force, we are building our own component, but I've started with the fire department, and we will spread out to other city departments to bring in additional personnel and have them trained.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Sadowski.
Thank you. Commissioner, where is the equipment going to be located?
The M1 task force equipment is located at Oakland County International Airport. That equipment there is for a large-scale emergency, and it can be activated to go anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world.
Okay.
It is transportable via cargo plane anywhere.
So if we needed it, we're looking at probably about a half hour, 45 minutes to get it down?
Probably longer than that, probably 3 hours. What Macomb County is doing is creating the ability to handle our own emergencies for up to 7 days. The M1 task force has the ability to come in and relieve you and supplement you and provide services for up to 21 days. And therefore, we could work in other regions. So it just, what we're doing is laying this foundations for ever expanding cooperatives.
Excuse me. So really, the payoff to us, is there an annual fee to participate in this?
No, we have a member on the team right now, one member, and we hope to at least get 2 more people on that team. You have to qualify for the team, and only the highest level trained personnel and the most qualified actually qualify for that team. Currently, we have 1 member.
So then, in lieu of cost, we get a member trained, but that member can be pulled for emergencies within the region then?
Yes,
okay.
Within the region, within the country, and within the world if activated. It does require a declaration from the governor, though.
Now, who becomes the lead agency in the event that something happens? Something happens in Warren, road construction cave-in, and we activate this. Who does this regional group answer to? Is it still Warren Fire
Yes.
that controls that? Okay, so they become a subordinate of...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Warren is responsible for our community. We make all decisions in our own community. And if we request assistance from other communities, they come in as part of the cooperative and work under our jurisdiction. However, they are protected by their own community's liabilities. But we remain in control of our own community.
Okay.
And vice versa, when we respond to another community, we work under their authority and direction.
Very good. Well, and again, this is another good example of the shared services and not so much consolidation, but where you got different communities responding to and helping out, and certainly get my support tonight. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Will question motion, Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Bacamino?
Yes.
Ms. Collegio?
Yes.
Mr. Sadowski?
Yes.
Mr. Warner?
Yes.
Mr. St. Pierre, yes. Item passes. Item G.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, 8G, consideration and adoption of a revised resolution approving sale of city-owned property to J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, N.A., successor by merger to Chase Home Finance, LLC. Property known as Lot 409, except the south 14 feet of Sir Mackey's Van Dyke subdivision, part of parcel ID number 13-16-479-019.
Is there a motion to transfer this property?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Stevens.
Support.
Support by Sadowski. Any discussion? No discussion? We'll question the motion. Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Sadowski?
Yes.
Mr. Bacamino?
Yes.
Ms. Colegio?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Warner?
Yes.
Mr. St. Pierre, yes. Item passes. It's transferred. Item 9.
Item 9A, miscellaneous correspondence, Ramey E. Phillips Jr., Certified Public Accountant. INRAE, report of audit and comments and recommendation, City of Warren Water and Sewer System audit for calendar year ending December 31st, 2010.
Motion receive and file.
Support.
And let the record reflect, we had, the mayor did touch on many of these things during his presentation. As a result, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's received and filed. Item 10, audience.
Item 10. Item 10, audience, an opportunity for citizens' participation.
Tony Police.
Good evening, Tony, please. I just want to bring up again what I brought up the last time. If this city plans on going forward, we have to go forward together. We can't have people from here coming in under negative and getting kind of silly and maybe sometimes stupid. Okay, but by the same token, you guys up there and one lady, you guys and one lady up there and the administration has to come together with us. I'll be honest with you. If Mayor Fouts again goes to all 5 or 6 of you, I'm going to raise a lot of hell at this microphone. I talked with him in private, and he seemed to agree that we need to work together and whatever. The other thing I want to talk about, the other thing I want to talk about is, unless we let the private industry take care of the housing industry, we're never going to go anywhere. I don't have any more money in my back pocket. Every time you sell a house for less than what it's supposed to be, when you pay $160, $150 to fix it and $75 or $60 to sell it, you take $5 grand out of my back pocket. I got the shock of my life when I got mine appraised. The shock of my life. I thought that was going to be my money for the rest of my life while I'm here. But again, I want to reiterate, we have to cut this baloney out as far as being negative and not going forward. We can go forward together, I believe. I'm a very naive person sometimes, but we can go forward together. We do not need to go through some of the stuff that goes on here. And I'm glad, Mr. St. Pierre, I'm glad you're not using the gavel so much tonight. I don't like the gavel.
Thank you, Mr. Police. Next person is Chris Pasternak.
Good evening. Just curious, has anyone found an answer to the question that I posed last week of how many times the park has been open? The $750,000 park that we have that was open next to Owen Jacks, did anyone get an answer to that? Thank you very much. And who talked to Parks and Rec? Because ever since then, it's been open. Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Ever since Friday, it's been open. Today, I noticed it wasn't open, but it's been raining, not a lot of light, so it may have been closed for that reason. Who knows? But ever since Friday, it's been open. I appreciate that. Although I won't be going there, my family probably won't, but I appreciate for the other citizens within the area. We spent all that money. We should have it open to them. Not much else. That was pretty much all I had for you guys tonight. Just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and enjoy your family and give thanks for everything you got. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pasternak. Next person is Joe Dabrowski.
Let me start with happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope you enjoy your holiday. I was making note to the presentation Mr. Hartley and the other two gentlemen were putting on, and I thought it was interesting that it wasn't the biggest factor, but one of the things that he pointed out was that it's not a very safe place to walk the streets here. Pretty interesting considering that's one of the biggest things the mayor lays brag to. One of the other things he pointed out was that 4 years ago, our revenue stream took a nosedive. Is it just a coincidence? Or am I the only one who found it kind of ironic that's when Mayor Fouts took office? I don't think so. What I do think we need to do is take a look at the city of Detroit. I watched a press conference that Mayor Bing put on, and it wasn't 60 times the word I or me. He said we need to take a 10% pay cut. We need to take a 10% reduction in our health care because they're on the verge of an emergency financial manager. And the gentleman here, he pointed out, we're already at a level 4. And I think to cut off some of the irrational things that the city wastes money on, we just extended the recycling contract. That cost us $500,000 a year. So now we just extended it for 2 more years. There's another $1 million down the drain. Whether you want to sit there and snicker or not, it's the truth. You might have deceived the people. I don't believe that's proper. It generates revenue, yes, nowhere near as much as it loses. It lost over $500,000 a year. That's wasteful spending of taxpayer dollars. Now, at the rate we're going, in another 2 years, we'll be in as bad of shape, if not worse, than the city of Detroit. These are the things we need to fix. City council members should take at least a 10% pay cut. You now are concerned with 1/5 of the city. As before, council members were responsible for the entire city. So I think that's another thing you should take a look at. I think it would benefit the taxpayers. Thank you and have a nice night.
Thank you, Mr. Dabrowski. And the next person would be Tomas, how you pronounce it? Banya.
Good evening, Council. Once again, Tomas Banya, resident of Warren. One thing that I was going to comment on earlier during the water budget presentation was that the mayor had brought something up regarding shared services, that they're currently at a status quo. Well, if you review the slide that was presented at that time, it's actually a $150,000 increase. I don't know how a $150,000 increase is the status quo. In regards to the shared services for the Parks and Recreation Department that was approved at the last meeting, something confused me because there was a statement made that Sterling Heights residents won't get the resident rate for the Warren Community Center, but when we go to Sterling Heights for an event, we get the resident rate. So either we're screwing them out of something or we're getting some kind of great deal. I don't know which one it is. Something I'm going to bring up about FOIAs is I have a FOIA here from August 5th that I had paid for, and I've yet to receive it in the format that I requested it. That's several months that I've been waiting now. Was looking over some stuff that I got from Bill Schulte, State Attorney General. I'm going to read you guys a few things from what he sent me. Open Meetings Act. What bodies are covered? The Open Meetings Act applies to all meetings of a public body, and which is defined as any state or local legislative or governing body, including a board, commission, committee, subcommittee, authority, or council that is empowered by state constitution, statute, charter, ordinance, resolution, or rule to exercise governmental or proprietary authority to perform a governmental or proprietary function, a lessee of such a body performing an essential public purpose or function pursuant to the lease agreement. The Zoning Board of Appeals, in my opinion, would fall under that definition. And I'm actually going to disagree with the state law on this. They say it's a quasi-judicial body. In my opinion, I say it's a quasi-legislative body because they don't rule based on the law. They make exemptions to the law. Another thing here is emails. And I was just told I have 1 minute left, so I won't go into it. But basically it says email communications are typically not allowed. Email texting, because it doesn't conform to the definition of an open meeting. Mr. Stevens, I chastised Mr. Sadowski for this one, so I'm going to chastise you as well. Announcements should not be on the agenda. It's not in the council rules of procedure. I hope you correct that or begin to suspend the rules to make that proper. Lastly, I will ask to please provide us with a truly transparent government, not what we have on the current website, which goes up and down like a roller coaster. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That does it for our audience participation. Thank you for all your cooperation. I appreciate it. We all do.
Item 11, there's no council calendar of pending matters. Item 12, council business. 12A, Council Secretary Scott C. Stevens, discussion in re, setting a date for a committee of the whole meeting regarding the revision of council rules of procedure. I guess
Why don't you make the motion?
I'll make a motion to approve
A date.
Yeah.
And ask for discussion.
Support.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed to this discussion in regards to amending agenda? Seeing none, so moved. Well, wait. You wanted to discuss?
Discuss the date.
Discuss before, a date.
The date that I was looking at was a committee of the whole of December 20th, at a committee of the whole prior to the next meeting. Every council member will be getting an electronic version of the council rules of procedure, so you can make your changes right on that and have it available. That should give you plenty of time to make any changes that you believe are fit, and then we can discuss those.
All in favor for December 20th?
Sir.
7? What time?
Yeah, at 7 o'clock, yes.
Any objection? All in favor, say aye. Aye. So we all know now, okay. Next item. 12B.
Next item is 12B. Council Secretary Scott Stevens, discussion in raid, requests the city attorney to draft a resolution to be sent to the Michigan Public Service Commission to require utility companies to have an emergency response time of 1 hour or less when requested by police or fire departments in an emergency. Motion to approve with discussion.
Support. Discussion as well, Madam?
Stevens, who supported? Mr. Warner.
Mr. Warner.
I'd like to add something to it. I talked to Mr. Stevens about this earlier.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Mr.
What brought this up was last week there was a fire in Royal Oak, and in the midst of a fire, the wire fell on the house, which precluded the fire department from extinguishing the fire with water in fear of electrocution to their employees, or to the firefighters. They put in an emergency call to DTE to shut off the power. There was a 4-hour delay of DTE personnel getting to the site. All this time, the firefighters are standing there watching the house burn. It was a total loss, but they were well within their stated emergency response time of 4.5 hours. And as such, I think that is ludicrous, and that should be a better response time by the utility companies, and that's why I've requested this to be sent up. Royal Oak is pursuing this also. Their city manager has written a letter requesting the same action. And that's my reason for presenting this.
Mr. Chair? Discussion.
Mr. Sadowski.
If everybody remembers, almost the identical situation happened here in Warren on Martin Road between Mound and Ryan, where the power line fell on the garage, and it was a complete loss. The gentleman whose garage burned down had a substantial amount of heavy equipment in there, and you know, it was our fire department who was there on the scene couldn't take care of the situation simply because the power couldn't get cut off. Not only did was the garage a total loss, but the whole quadrant was without power for 24, almost 36 hours, depending on where you were located at. So I think in some respect we do address points of this in that cost recovery ordinance that we're waiting for second reading to come forth. And I know SBC had some issues with it where we were trying to set up meetings with them about it, but they have declined to meet with us. So anytime we want to bring that one back, but we can put that even in our cost recovery ordinance, that if they're not there within a certain amount of time, maybe we can make them liable for damages. But I'm thinking more in the sense of the accident that happened where the Warren police, I believe it was this week, had to close down a road because power lines. Yeah, I mean, so it closed down that whole, that whole area for several hours because we had to wait for the lines to get put up. So, I mean, two examples here in the city. So I would agree with you, and I would, maybe we want to address that not only in the respect that you're talking about, but also add some teeth to it in our cost recovery ordinance. So maybe we should have the judge look at both aspects, and we can look at it from a two-pronged attack. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Warner.
No,
Okay.
I would agree to that amendment.
All right. I have another amendment that I'd like to add as well. You know, when I saw this thing about DTE, you know, is it time to beat up on DTE tonight? Well, you know, and there's the way we have set up the city council where we run in the districts. And in my particular district, it's known as Bishop Circuit 1755. A resident called me and it, you know, pointed out to me because, you know, I have a fairly busy lifestyle and so my wife working, that we may not notice when there's blackouts and how long they may last. In the last 5 months, there's been 3 major blackouts in regards to Bishop Circuit with the 1755 number. And the customer care section is the area of DTE that's responsible to respond. And for some reason, and maybe, I don't know if anybody else has had this complaint in their respective district, but this is quite a bit. There is plenty of minor brownouts, so to speak, that may last for hours. But seniors that are on, you know, sleep apnea and whatever else that they need their power for, and running whatever type of unit that may be germane to, you know, keeping them alive, and as well as their health, and not to mention for daily living, is that this is too much. And so this person had recognized it and brought it to my attention. I'd like to use his name, but I never said I would, so I'm not going to mention his name. And he's gotten no response. I would like something from City Council to go out to get a response in regards to Bishop Circuit 1755 from the customer care section from the City Council, so that we can get a response, so the residents know that at least we have something as far as an inspection, an ongoing investigation. I'm doing my own investigation with certain people from DTE that I hope to get some answers in regards to Bishop Circuit 1755 and the blackouts. Mr. Hartley, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to say Mayor Fouts has already met with several high-level DTE people. We have an open dialogue with them, although not about that particular problem, so we can certainly piggyback that. I have to say the response, other than the fact that they're on it and they know about it, there's not your particular situation, but other areas of the city, it really hasn't changed much. But the mayor has, over the summertime when we had several brownouts, met with DTE officials, and we're pursuing that, so we'll be happy to continue with whatever other interests that members of council have determined are also a problem.
And the current president of a DTE, the chairman, he's from Fitzgerald High School. So maybe, just maybe, we'll get hopefully some hometown advantage there as a result of that. So that's my request from City Council, if you please add it, and then thank you, Mr. Hartley, on behalf of the Mayor's office as well. A motion to adopt that as well? Whoever made, Ms. Stevens and Warner?
Yeah.
Yes.
Agree with that.
Thank you. All in
Read
favor? Go ahead. Anything else?
Let me just ask real quick, the Bishop Circuit 1755, that is DTE specific, or?
Yes.
Okay, because the resolution that I'm speaking
I
of...
want to be separate. I don't want to be part of your resolution. It can be a separate
Okay,
item.
so it'd be a separate item?
Yes.
Okay.
Because yours is completely separate. And
All right, so this would be
correspondence from the
correspondence to DTE.
Yes. And I'll have the customer care section and provide that information for you as well. And we'll send it directly to the new president from Fitzgerald High School.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any motions to adjourn? Motion by Sadowski. Support by Ms. Collegio. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.